How big can a person be that they cannot move around the world without someone's help? When he stepped on the ground, the entire village thought an earthquake had begun. No one could understand what was happening, but it was just Master Chu training because he had a goal to lose weight as quickly as possible, as he was facing a major competition with an enemy. However, even a mosquito's touch was enough to make him fall. He was so clumsy that talk of any battle was out of the question. During a walk, he dislocated his shoulder, and his multi-ton body began to fall to the ground, shaking the plates on neighboring tables. His clothes did not last long because no master could make such a dense material that could withstand the pressure of his body. He fell to the floor and severely injured his arm. But was it always like this? What does it take to push one's body to such a state? In fact, no. It all began many years ago when the great village was attacked by gods, and they started doing whatever they pleased, including burning down houses. No one could resist their power, so everyone had to run, leaving their homes and saving their lives. There was no other choice. It was on that day his parents perished in that unfair battle. His home was destroyed, and he was left an orphan. But now he has returned to the past to confront the evil gods and deal with all of this. Except he ended up in the body of this fat man, and needs to deal with this problem somehow. He has only 6 months to save the village and overcome all enemies who want to harm his village. He needs to reach the great ginseng root first, because if the god sees it before him, all his training and preparation will be entirely pointless. But damn it, it will take a minimum of 16 months to get this body in shape, and he simply doesn't have that much time. He needs to figure something out. Odette starts shouting at the shaman and tells him that he promised his son would be fine, but he's doing nothing to save him. But then Chu gets up and says he needs to go for a walk. Otherwise it will take him too long to get himself in order. The father immediately orders the strongest palace servants to help Chu get some fresh air. But Chu refuses the help. He doesn't want to be carried again because that won't help him lose the extra weight, so he decides to stand up on his own. The assistant grabs him by the arms and helps him walk. It's very difficult because Chu is not exactly lightweight. Here he takes his first steps, and his father looks on, remembering how he took his own first steps in childhood. And now, after many years, he's walking again. The courtiers watch all this in amazement, wondering how Chu just lay and sat for so many years, with everything brought to him, and now he's walking on his own. The training begins, and the trainer yells that if he wants to lose weight, he must cut all sugar from his diet, or nothing will work. But before everything, they need to do a weigh-in. Chu sits on the scales, and as a counterweight, they release many pigs. However, the rope that should hold several tons simply snaps, and Chu doesn't even budge a centimeter. Chu realizes that this won't work, and achieving the perfect body will take a lot of time. He needs to find another way to lose weight. And if he doesn't find it within 6 months, the gods will start causing chaos throughout the village again. But what to do? Or perhaps it's worth considering an alternative solution to the problem. Is such an option even possible? Or will he need to take some action? Or is there a way out? Of course, if he can reach the great city before the gods and obtain the ginseng root, they won't have enough power to burn down the entire city. This thought makes Chu smile. This is the solution to his problem and how to solve everything faster. His laughter fills the rooms of the palace. The assistant doesn't understand why he's happy and thinks he's gone mad. So he quickly runs into the palace to call the shaman before it's too late, as the training seems to be taking a toll on Chu's health. The great shaman Lin runs. He began to serve the court at the age of 20, while his classmates were still taking exams. At 50, he began to teach his successful medicine. He must know a way for fast weight loss. As soon as Lin reaches Chu, he asks him if there is a way to lose weight quickly because he doesn't have much time to wait. Lengthy training and proper nutrition are not what he needs right now. He needs some kind of potion that will solve his problem. The shaman says that such a remedy doesn't exist, but they can use the power of water, of course, thought Chu. While they were walking to the lake, the assistants were already exhausted, as they did not expect Chu to want to go to the lake so quickly. They can't understand why he wants to lose weight at all. Chu begins to wade into the water, and as he had forgotten before, water possesses the remarkable property of buoyancy. In the water, it was quite easy for him to move, so he decided to go further. Advancing forward, Chu suddenly stumbled. The ground abruptly gave way, forcing him to sink to the bottom. With splashes, Chu's giant body disappeared underwater. He didn't even have time to blink. On the surface, only circles in the water indicated that someone had been there. Odette, the servant of the young master, thought that Chu was just amusing himself with such playfulness. Who could have thought he would enjoy swimming so much? Chu continued to dive deeper and deeper where the blue of the water thickened. Panic was taking over him. Suddenly, one of the servants had an idea. Could it be that there was an abyss underwater, and the young master was simply drowning? Panic overwhelmed the servant, who realized the situation. It wasn't a joke. Losing his master in such a silly way would be disastrous. Chu was gradually losing consciousness due to lack of oxygen. Everything swirled and darkened before his eyes. Before his eyes, Chu saw a vision of a carriage, pulled by 2 horses. racing through the forest, with signs of arrows hitting it. He felt like a ghost, observing the events. A woman held a baby wrapped in a blanket, looking at him with sadness in her eyes. She was clearly badly wounded and fading before his eyes. Suddenly, an unknown girl emerged from the water together with Chu, who was unconscious. Dragging him ashore, she dropped his body to the ground with a loud thud. The servants rushed to revive their young master. Two of the servants bowed in front of Chu's father, looking horrified and incredibly sorry for what had happened. It seemed as if his aura took the form of fire, surrounding him with a furious flow ready to incinerate those who caused the owner's wrath. Huang, unable to bear such pressure, blurted out that it was the idea of the imperial healer who betrayed Chu. Chu's father became even more furious and drew his sword, rushing towards the healer, but they managed to stop him from taking revenge. To prevent the situation from escalating further, a girl entered and attracted everyone's attention with her voice. Unexpectedly, she spoke with reason, suggesting that the healer explain his actions and argue his point of view. Not losing his composure, the healer explained that the young master wanted to lose weight badly, and that's why he suggested this method. Hearing this, Chu's father regained his senses, realizing that he had completely forgotten about his son's feelings. In the ensuing silence, the girl's voice was heard again, proposing to allow the young master to swim, as it could be done not only in the stream. Chu lay there and pondered how he almost drowned in a stream, and it wasn't even the sea. And then two girls entered his room, the one who had recently saved him from drowning, and the one who suggested his training, the sister of his current body. They came to invite him along. Looking at the girl's face, Chu couldn't understand why she was so beautiful, finding it hard to believe she could be related to his current body. The maid of his sister approached Chu, wanting to help him get up and finally leave. Chu didn't believe that she could do it and even tried to dissuade her. After all, 4 strong men had lifted him before, and it was difficult even for them. But surprisingly, she effortlessly lifted him to his feet. Sitting in a sedan chair, Chu couldn't understand why the porters were in such high spirits, even though the journey seemed arduous for them. He kept thinking, these guys were definitely not simple. They carried him so easily and effortlessly. Before Chu, a spectacle unfolded that surprised him. People were sweating and digging a hole, lining it with stones. Approaching and examining the excavation site, he couldn't understand what it was. Were they digging a grave? His sister clarified the situation, explaining that now he wouldn't need to go to the stream since he had his own pond now. The workers, seeing Chu, rushed to greet him, their faces lit up with smiles. They were very kind and friendly. The young master couldn't understand why they were so happy, as the old bastard had exploited them. Shouldn't they be hostile to his son? But the people were genuinely delighted to see him, and their smiles never left their faces. Then Huang approached Chu, who immediately asked him about what was happening here. Huang explained that his father was a symbol of integrity, and always shared food and water with the peasants, caring for their well-being. Chu pondered over everything he heard and saw. If he put all the facts together, looking at how Sung was so generous with supplies and always ready to help the workers, he began to understand, and it dawned on him. If there's a wealthy man with a good reputation among the people whom everyone respects, and he is his son, it's true that he doesn't need to do anything to live well since he already has everything. Only now did it fully sink in for him. The candle was burning, measuring time and giving an idea of how long Chu had been underwater. And suddenly, Chu's massive body emerged from the water. Thanks to the artificial pond, he no longer tried to sink to the deep bottom. Huang had already prepared a massive steel ball on a chain to aid in the training. After coming out of the water, Chu had a weight attached to him using a steel hoop around his ankle. Securing the ball, Huang hurled it into the water, and Chu followed its trajectory. The heavy iron core quickly sank to the bottom, taking Chu with it, firmly anchoring him below. Due to its weight, Chu couldn't assume the lotus position, so he decided to meditate while standing. Focusing his mind, he began to gather spiritual energy, spiraling it and absorbing it. A ball of golden energy formed in front of Chu, growing more luminous with each passing moment as it was absorbed. Having gathered enough energy, he opened his eyes, achieving maximum concentration, preparing for the next step. A smile crept upon Chu's lips. He managed to absorb the spiritual energy and direct it towards his heart, which, in turn, began to circulate it throughout his body. Feeling the power of the spiritual energy, he could now sense the water currents surrounding him. He gradually started to manipulate the water around him, forming small vortices. Confident in his abilities, Chu decided to test himself in one of the techniques. He thrust his leg forward and firmly planted it on the bottom, preparing himself. The first powerful Shaolin technique capable of shattering rocks from 100 meters away. After finishing the preparation, Chu swiftly extended his arm in a strike. Continuing the training, Chu moved fluidly, transitioning from one pose to another like a dance. The sharp movements of his hands resembled sword strikes, slicing through the water without any resistance. Chu performed lightning-fast lunges, another technique, Namgun's celestial sword. Meanwhile, Huang sat on the shore, marveling at how long the young master could hold his breath underwater. Did some talent awaken in him after his near-drowning experience? And he had been training for a whole month already. Chu surfaced from the water with a satisfied smile. Without catching his breath, he called for Huang. Back at home, an important moment had come for Chu, the moment to measure his weight. Huang prepared the scales, and after a moment of hesitation, Chu finally stepped onto the platform. Surprisingly, his efforts were not in vain. The scale's arrow showed a significantly lower value than during the first weighing. Uncontainable joy overcame both Chu and Huang. The latter was also happy for his young master. Unable to contain his feelings, Chu embraced Huang, expressing his gratitude, as without his support, he wouldn't have achieved such results in such a short time. Calming down, Huang began talking about how wonderful it was that the servants wouldn't have to sew torn clothes anymore, how the sedan bearers would find it much easier, and how, according to rumors, Chu was rejected in marriage because he was too fat. The last remark was unnecessary. That was the last straw. Chu erupted in anger. Huang clearly didn't know how to read the atmosphere and didn't understand when to stop. But what Huang did understand was that he should flee to escape the impending storm. So he quickly left to tend to his duties. Chu sat down to ponder. He gained spiritual energy and shed a lot of weight. But this was just the beginning. Spiritual energy is what people obtain through numerous exercises. However, this path could be shortened by consuming spiritual herbs, which would reduce the potential. That's why Chu needed a virgin ginseng. Chu's thoughts were interrupted by the healer, who brought a beneficial healing potion meant to restore his strength. Taking it in his hands and practically snatching it from the healer, Chu quickly drank the entire potion. But as is often the case, medicines usually taste bitter. Chu realized this too late and could only express his displeasure by spitting out the bowl. Entering the house, he began to meditate again to gather and replenish his spiritual energy. Taking deep breaths, Chu absorbed the energy along with the air. Drop by drop, Chu absorbed the spiritual power, and soon he would be ready to face that demon. After the meditation, Chu once again took the healing potion, greatly surprising Huang, who knew how bad it tasted. He also decided to diversify his training, so now Chu would hike up the mountain. 2 more months later, Chu stood underwater, continuing his grueling training, harnessing his spiritual power. He switched to more complex techniques, gathering energy and releasing it with a sharp push of his open palm, creating a powerful stream of water. At the same time, a large wave rose to the surface from the impact. Huang couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't believe that this arrogant swine could use the palm technique. He pondered aloud, oblivious to anyone around. But Huang's excitement was short-lived as he failed to notice Chu's father standing behind him, who clearly wasn't pleased to hear such things about his son. Taking the head manager's sword, he was already thinking of cutting the impudent one into pieces. But he wasn't allowed to, as the head manager intervened, ordering the servants to drag Huang to the dungeon, thus saving him from the patriarch's wrath. Huang's face, being dragged on the ground like a sack of potatoes, expressed immense gratitude. In his thoughts, he thanked the head manager for such mercy. Chu's father, forgetting the recent misunderstanding, was literally glowing with joy because his little son had just practiced martial arts. Deciding to support his son's endeavors, he ordered the head manager to bring paper, ink, and a brush, intending to write a letter. A little later, gathered at the estate, they presented Chu with a book on martial arts that would now serve his training. They taught him the technique of divine sky, not in the form of a thick book on martial arts. Chu's father was very pleased, stating that it was a secret technique from the imperial palace, astonishing Chu with such influence. Moreover, he claimed that he wrote to the emperor once, and the emperor replied immediately. In reality, he wrote letters every day. At some point, he even lost faith that the emperor would respond. In the courtyard, Chu was introduced to his new teacher, his sister's husband, who unexpectedly turned out to be knowledgeable in martial arts. They called him Chun. He had a rather handsome face and didn't give the impression of an experienced warrior. Chu's father began to praise Chun as he belonged to one of the best martial clans, stroking his ego, making it seem like he would soon reach the heavens. Chu thought only about how the former head of this clan once begged him for training on his knees. Should he tell them the truth? But thinking about what might happen to his new father, he decided to wait. But then an idea came to his mind: how to legitimize his skills. If he said that he had studied under the head of the Dan clan, there shouldn't be any problems. And he could attribute all his techniques to the gifted book Divine Sky, given by the emperor. It would be difficult to verify. Having made up his mind, Chu fell to his knees before Chun, asking to be accepted as a disciple before a master. This deeply touched his father, who in his thoughts praised his son for becoming so respectful. The training continued, and Chu tried to fulfill all the requirements of his new teacher, which was still difficult given the state of his body. Assuming the first stance as Chun demanded, he tried to concentrate, but he lost balance again and barely stayed on his feet. Chun poured tons of anger on him, wondering how he couldn't even perform the simplest task. He tormented Chu and brought him to a boiling point. When Chu suggested trying a different stance, he received even more negativity. A bunch of words about his incompetence and immaturity. This was the last straw for Chu's patience. He couldn't tolerate such treatment anymore, considering that he was just pretending and not showing any real progress to avoid suspicion. Straightening up and looking at the infuriated Chun, he decided to set the record straight and proposed testing his skills in combat. Chun's laughter even surprised the birds flying over the estate. How could some inexperienced guy fight him? Taunting and picking his nose, Chu suggested that Chun was just scared and afraid to fight him. That hit a nerve with Chun, and falling for the childish trick, he started threatening that he used to be a part of the dragon family. But Chu's further provocations made Chun agree to spar. Overwhelmed by anger, he no longer cared who challenged him. But Chun said he wouldn't fight at full strength, as it wouldn't be fair. He closed his spiritual channels with a blow to the base of his neck, also tying his right hand to his body. When preparations were complete, Chun shouted that he was ready and even allowed Chu the first strike. Chu was fine with that and began to concentrate his energy for the strike. With a sudden burst of speed, he rushed towards Chun, gaining momentum with each step. This greatly surprised the overconfident opponent. As he flew within striking distance, Chu swung his right hand, preparing a devastating uppercut. Shooting upward like a spring, he aimed his fist at Chun's chin, but Chun managed to dodge, amazed at such agility. Despite his agility problems due to his physical condition, Chu continued his attacking combination, approaching from the right side where Chun's hand was fixed. He delivered a powerful strike to the side, preventing him from escaping. But Chu didn't stop there, concluding the attack with a swift strike from the back of his fist. Knocking Chun to the ground, Chu thought that he hadn't taught the conceited man enough, so he loomed over him, ready to pound him into the dirt. Chun couldn't believe his eyes. He said it was impossible. To which Chu replied with a satisfied smirk that he was, after all, his disciple. At the same time, Huan stood guard at the gates, his nose high. It was both an order and a punishment for him to stand there without proper rest. Chu approached, calling out to Huan, and inquired if he was pleased with the demotion, and whether serving on the post was too easy for him. Huan couldn't find an answer, only asking why the young master was not at the training session. Chu provided the logical response that the teacher was not in the condition to train at the moment. Meanwhile, the teacher was lying nearby, completely bandaged, and his wife, who was also Chu's sister, attended to him. He complained to her about how everything hurt and itched, but she was happy that her brother turned out to be so talented. After advising Chun one last time to rest and promising that he would feel better, she decided to leave him alone. A carriage drawn by horses approached the city gate. Inside, a man sat in the dim light, not making a sound. But as it turned out, he was not alone. His companion on the carriage journey said that he saw no point in participating personally. However, the man was adamant about visiting the clan. He ordered the coachman to take them to the address. Chu wandered through the city, observing the surroundings. He was interested in the world before chaos arrived. Suddenly, he noticed a group of men discussing something around one of the market stalls. Looking at such a quiet and peaceful life, Chu indulged in memories of how the chaos minions ravaged the world. His gaze became glazed, seeing nothing before him but those events. When they appeared and conquered the world, darkness engulfed the light and joy, leaving no place on earth for respite. But his thoughts were interrupted by the villagers who saw the young master, and joy was written all over their faces. They swarmed around him, observing him like some little creature, amazed that he could walk on his own. Someone didn't even know that he could do it. Then one of the girls offered him meat on a spit as a gift. Considering Chu's thinness and his diet, the offer was very tempting. Seeing this, all the villagers decided to give the young master a gift and started bringing various presents. Seeing such affection, even Chu's obsession with not accepting all this so easily subsided, and he thought that he could lead such a life after all. Suddenly, he felt someone's intense gaze, but when he turned his head, he couldn't see anyone. Perhaps it was just his imagination. Around the corner, a man in dark clothes and a wide-brimmed straw hat was hiding. He couldn't have noticed me, thought Chu, about to leave when the stranger suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Chu, wanting to inquire about what he was doing there. The unknown man reacted quickly and aggressively, swinging at Chu and hitting him. The blow was powerful and fast, and Chu was unprepared for it, unable to react in time. Chu's body flew as if shot from a cannon, crashing through the whole street until he was stopped by the wall of a building. When the dust settled, people could see the young master lying unconscious among the debris of the wall. The attacker hurried to escape, leaping onto the roof and running away. People yelled after him, calling to catch the intruder. When Chu came to his senses, he was furious, ready to tear his offender apart with his bare hands. People were confused, not knowing how to react to the attack and Chu's behavior. Gathering himself and seeing the looks of the people, Chu assured them that he was fine and decided to leave the scene. thinking he should improve his combat skills. In Chu's house, his father was having a conversation with his daughter. He was very pleased with his son's achievements and already considering where to place him. Chu's sister, however, was more reserved in her feelings and asked not to rush things. It was too early to talk about such matters. The mention that such haste was due to the Namugan clan and its heiress with whom Chu was supposed to marry upset him. Namugan had no intention of getting married since childhood, aspiring to become a master of martial arts, which she owed to no one. Observing the man's condition, she realized that no, it wasn't because of he. It had to do with the reason for his wife's death. Enemies were after him, but they ended up killing her, and he still blamed himself for it. After all, he was the one who should have died instead of her. The horse-drawn carriage with 4 horses continued its journey, and inside, 2 men continued their conversation. The members of the Namugan clan assumed that the talk would turn to marriage again, and rumors about Chu's laziness, plumpness, and lack of character were widespread. But they continued on their way. One of the men pointed somewhere with his finger. They were supposed to learn everything about Chu there, and only then could they get rid of him forever. Chu sneezed. Surely someone was thinking of him. He thought that it was just someone admiring him behind his back. Stepping into the alley, Chu couldn't find anyone. The faces were completely empty, which was quite strange for this place. He decided to check everywhere possible, even peeking into trash cans, but everywhere was empty, absolutely no one. Chu couldn't understand where everyone had gone. Suddenly a man with a broom appeared from around the corner, immediately asking what the young master was doing here. Chu in turn wanted to inquire where all the poor people had gone, as there used to be plenty of them. To which the puzzled man replied that Chu's father had built houses and given land for cultivation to all the poor 20 years ago. But then Chu remembered that he had been told once that the walls have ears, or to be more precise, the poor people, from whom one could learn a lot. The beggars hid in the shadows of walls, in every alley and corner. They were the ones who had their network of informants, who filled the whole world and called themselves the clan of beggars. And then Chu realized that if there were no beggars here now, then there was no such clan as such. And there was no one to obtain information from. At a table sat a man, one of those who had come here by carriage. He was the head of the Namugan clan. Opposite him was a man of an unpresentable appearance, sharply contrasting with him. Instead of the patriarch of the clan, the scruffy-looking man started talking, assuming that they needed information about Chu to stop the attempts of marriage and get rid of him once and for all, as expected from the clan of beggars, the patriarch thought. However, the member of the clan of beggars said that he couldn't provide such information, clearly bargaining, although he didn't admit it to himself. The second man couldn't understand the point of hiding information about the scientist's son from the patriarch. But with a wave of his hand, the patriarch interrupted him. The case was in the Yu family, the informant confessed. Their old man's rage could harm not only the local branch but the whole organization. After thinking for a moment, the patriarch threw a bag full of silver onto the table, hinting at the seriousness of his intentions. But the informant stood his ground. They needed the permission of the head, otherwise they refused to work. Without changing his facial expression, the patriarch took off a fancy-looking ring from his finger and placed it on the table. The son of the patriarch was astonished. The one who possessed it received complete protection from the Namugan clan. Such things were not given away for nothing. Chu approached the rich-looking house. It was amusing that it was a branch of the clan of beggars, and its appearance didn't match the name. No wonder he had been searching for it for so long. As he was about to enter, a sword was brought to his throat by the guard, calling him a fatty and refusing to let Chu inside, citing the presence of important guests. Deciding to ignore the insolent one, as he was no longer an ordinary citizen but the sole heir of the Yu family, Chu headed forward. But just as he took a step, he received a blow to the back of his head. The guard had clearly crossed the line, and Chu had no intention of letting such things slide. Bloodthirsty and baring his teeth, the guard moved closer to teach him a lesson. Inside the unknown room, 2 men in dark clothes and straw hats were reporting to their leader. Their appearance resembled the one who attacked Chu. After listening to the report, the unknown man drew conclusions that only he understood and fell into thought. Sung, how is that old tiger doing? The informant handed over to the clan leader the requested information about Chu, everything they could find from the day of his birth until yesterday. Handing over the notebook, he warned that no one should know about this. Snatching the records from the man's hands, he vowed in the name of the clan that no one would learn about it. The whole story would remain a secret. The informant said goodbye and hurried to leave. The patriarch, opening the records and immersing himself in reading, was interrupted after a short while by shouts coming from the street. Asking his son to check what was happening, he continued reading. His son looked out the window and saw Chu standing opposite the guard who had struck him on the head, and tension seemed to hang between them. A bruise was forming on the guard's cheek from the strike. As you might have guessed, Chu had put some effort into it. Despite that, he comforted himself with the thought that he wasn't ready, which is why he let the blow through. Chu continued to taunt the guard, criticizing all his movements and techniques. His kung fu was clearly inferior to Chu's. The attacker got angry with the criticism, thinking that it was aimed at his clan's style. It wasn't like that. He was just clearly not well trained, as Chu hastened to inform him. Chu also suggested that he simply apologize, and he would forgive him. There was no point in wasting his time on any riffraff. This became the tipping point for the guy, who, breaking free, rushed to attack with his blade unsheathed, angered by the insult to the Na Mugen clan. Chu easily evaded, even lazily considering the situation, stating that the guy was the first to unsheath his sword, so he was ready for a serious fight. Stepping back from the attack line and then lunging forward, Chu made an unexpected upward move, catching the not-so-agile guy off guard. The powerful blow hit the guy's torso, lifting him half a meter off the ground and taking all the air out of his lungs, leaving him gasping. Not stopping there, Chu grabbed the guy by the hair and delivered a powerful right-hand blow to the opponent's head, finally throwing him off balance. Then came another strike, this time with a kick, driving the stranger into the ground and raising clouds of dust. Holding the guy by the collar and clenching his fist, Chu intended to teach him some manners, as the clan had failed in that task. People were starting to gather around them. Chu kept delivering one blow after another to the already battered face of the guy, hammering good manners into the brute. But then he was interrupted by a shout, asking him to stop, which came from somewhere above. Glancing at the source of the sound, Chu noticed a silhouette quickly approaching him. A forceful landing, and a new combatant appeared before Chu. Stepping back and taking a couple of steps, Chu created some distance between him and the newcomer. But the newcomer didn't wait and rushed after him, rapidly closing the gap and accumulating spiritual energy in his hand. Chu recognized the technique used by the Patriarch's son. It was the explosive lightning-fast mystic palm. He quickly realized that he couldn't defeat him in this body. There was only one option left, or maybe there was one more. Preparing himself, Chu also began to concentrate energy in his hand, getting ready to take the blow. The opponents closed in on each other rapidly. It was difficult to block such a strike, so Chu planned to redirect the energy and neutralize the impulse. Finally, they collided in a standoff. Chu grabbed his opponent's fist with both hands, trying to nullify the strike. At that moment, the Patriarch decided to peek outside to inquire about the commotion and caught sight of the moment of the collision. Chu gradually lost the upper hand and gave in. Passed. Muscular hands, scarred, held a sword, and the owner of the hands was counting the number of strikes performed in training. 29,996. 29,997. Past Chu stood balancing on a plank on top of a sharp stone, and from his sword swings, water rippled away due to strong gusts of wind. Unable to maintain balance, Chu fell forward and plunged into the water. The construction under him was extremely unstable. His teacher was dissatisfied. Chu didn't hold the sword well enough, so as a punishment he was assigned 10,000 more swings. Night, two people dueling in the middle of a field with swords, and their clashing could be heard tens of meters away. At some point, the battle froze. The swords clashed once again in a standoff. Both opponents tried to overcome each other to gain an advantage. Chu couldn't withstand the pressure and bent under it, immediately receiving a powerful knee strike to the solar plexus. Falling to the ground, trying to catch his breath, Chu dropped his sword and looked at his teacher. The teacher was not pleased with him. Chu immediately pleaded for mercy, asking the teacher to stop hitting him, spare him, and give him a little rest. His teacher smiled in response, but it didn't reflect his true feelings towards his student. Enraged by the student's attitude towards the weapon and training, the teacher burst into a lecture about how a true enemy wouldn't spare him, and one who abandons his weapon doesn't deserve to live. He immediately swung his fist to drive this lesson home in a more accessible way. Present. Chu missed the strike and was propelled backward, flying through the air. The attack had indeed been powerful, and he couldn't handle it. Chu couldn't understand what had broken his concentration because everything had been going according to plan, and he could have stopped the attack, but he failed. Servants rushed towards him as they recognized him. His opponent stood in contemplation. Although he couldn't completely neutralize the explosive power of the strike, he had managed to disperse it significantly, and how he did it was unclear to him. As Chu suffered damage from the strike, not enough to knock him out but enough to make him boil with rage, veins bulged on his temples, and anger rolled ever closer. Finally regaining his composure, Chu became the embodiment of rage, intending to get up and subdue the scoundrel who dared to attack him. Surrounded by servants, he tried to drill a hole into his opponent with his gaze, but suddenly fell back. By that time, others had come out of the building, including the fair-haired informant. Addressing the clan patriarch first, he immediately noticed someone lying on the ground. It was Chu, who exuded torrents of fury even while lying down. The blow clearly didn't do him any good, as he had to come to his senses while horizontal. Taking a closer look at the person lying on the ground, the informant from the beggar clan recognized the young lord, and immediately rushed to him to check his condition. Asking who dared to do such a thing to the young lord, the general attention was directed towards the patriarch's son, and fury was evident in the eyes of the people. The young man realized that all the attention was on him, and what's more, it was far from friendly. He glanced at his father, but found no support there. Understanding that the information he gathered about Chu was not needed, as it clearly did not reflect the true state of affairs, the patriarch decided to resolutely tear the records apart. By that time, Chu's father had arrived and immediately launched a verbal attack on the perpetrators of his son's misery. He knew that this could happen, and the beggar clan was clearly involved. The fair-haired young man, taken aback, quickly began to justify himself, defaming the Namugun clan without hesitation. The head of the Namugun clan tried to defend himself, claiming that the attack was unintentional, and his son was not to blame, but such arguments didn't sway anyone. Why would anyone attack people in the first place? Chu's father was furious, and if it weren't for the fact that the man opposite him was quite influential and could become Chu's brother-in-law in the future, his head would have rolled long ago. A member of the beggar clan whispered to the young man to kneel down and apologize because Chu's father was a highly respected person. Even the emperor would heed him. When Chu's father was considering informing the emperor about the incident and had already made plans to discuss it with his son-in-law, Namugun realized that the situation was dire. This was no joke. Kneeling down, the two men began to alternately beg for forgiveness, trying to bury the incident and escalate the situation they found themselves in. Chu's father, who was again consumed by anger, saw his son almost on the brink of death, yet these two men kept clinging to his feet. His only son. Suddenly the door opened, and out came Chu, curious about the commotion outside. A hairstyle he couldn't fathom suddenly adorned his head. Passers-by, mostly young girls, found his hairstyle quite endearing. Apparently one of the maids had tried her best to braid his hair in such a way while he was unconscious. His father, seeing his son regained consciousness, hurriedly asked if he was all right. At the same time, the informant from the beggar clan immediately rushed towards Chu with unclear intentions. Upon reaching him, the man acted like a dog, hopping around Chu and showing extreme delight that the young lord was okay. While complimenting Chu's strength, he only provoked irritation in him. Unexpectedly, Chu bowed respectfully to the dark-haired man, showing him respect as an elder brother, even though Chu was younger. After all, they were related, and Chu had something up his sleeve. A cunning smile crept onto Chu's face while he was still bowing. He wasn't going to let it go just like that, but that would come later. Straightening up, Chu decided to inquire about what they were talking about while he was away. Chu's father said that he wanted to go to the emperor to punish the wretch who attacked Chu because he couldn't forgive him. But for now, Chu decided to ease the situation by cordially greeting his opponent, whose name was Sun. Formally, Chu was his uncle, despite being younger. With a darkened face, Chu pulled Sun's cheek as a form of punishment for disrespecting him. It turned out that Sun was his young instructor, who was supposed to teach him in the future. However, for Chu, the man had been more of a tormentor. Settling the score for that was a sacred mission. Passed. Chu was once again fighting with his instructor Sun, one of the 6 sages, who was obsessed with training. When Chu was distracted, Sun took the opportunity to thoroughly educate him with the flat side of his sword, showing no mercy. Chu was already lying on the ground, embracing Sun's legs, begging for mercy. He couldn't bear the beating anymore. But upon seeing Chu drop his sword again and beg for mercy, Sun flew into a rage and swung his sword as if it were a bludgeon, intending to continue his lesson for Chu. In a real battle, you won't beg for mercy from your enemy, Sun said, preparing another lesson for Chu. Present. Now Chu understood the hitch that prevented him from taking Sun's strike. His body had reacted to that attack on its own. After getting acquainted, everyone decided to gather around one table in the Chu family estate. Despite a certain awkwardness, they started a conversation, and Chu was curious about why they had left his older brother behind. Chu assumed they were here for a wedding, but he didn't have time for such events and hurriedly informed everyone, which surprised his interlocutors. Chu refused to elaborate on the fact that he still had much to learn and understand, to meet many people and even share work with them to explore the world, even beyond Murim. Chu's father was very surprised by this statement, claiming that the world beyond Murim was very dangerous, full of killers, bandits, and other unsavory characters. To this, Chu retorted, "Is Namgun a thug?" once again surprising even his father. Chu continued to talk about how practitioners of martial arts have their own path, trying to divert the conversation. But Namgun wasn't reading the situation and didn't understand what was going on. Chu decided to end the dialogue politely, bidding farewell to everyone, and turned to leave. Spotting a fair-haired young man named Hyun, Chu called him over, and he gladly rushed to Chu. With a wicked smile, Chu leaned closer to Hyun and suggested that they should talk outside. Those who remained inside exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding what had happened, feeling a bit awkward. Hyun started discussing Chu's hairstyle, which clearly didn't meet his standards. Instead of pointing it out, he chose to praise the young lord's hair. Chu got slightly annoyed upon noticing his hairstyle, and he began straightening and untangling his hair. They continued their conversation on the move, with Hyun trying to flatter Chu and being surprised by his knowledge of Murim. Chu, on the other hand, reminisced about his accursed teachers who had trained him for a long time. Negative emotions welled up in Chu as he remembered those memories, while Hyun continued to fawn over him. Pondering the situation and his actions, Chu decided to take on his first disciple, Sun, already imagining how the boy would torture him. It would be a good revenge. Chu stood by the shore, continuing his training, while Huan, standing nearby, asked him to take a little break. But Chu was not concerned about that. He walked determinedly towards his goal, despite the obstacles. However, his attitude towards Huang had worsened. Just then, Chu's sister arrived, also giving him advice about rest and taking care of himself and his body. She was accompanied by her maid guard. Huang immediately puffed up and straightened himself as if swallowing a wedge. He was clearly breathing unevenly around the maid, but he couldn't surprise anyone. Approaching Chu, his sister warned him about the dangers of Murim, especially since their mother had also died because of it. At those words, Chu's sister lost her composure, overwhelmed by fear for their family and, in particular, for Chu. Observing his sister's behavior, Chu decided to ask her what was wrong, as it was not like her at all. Determined to support his sister, Chu reassured her that nothing bad would happen to their Yu clan anymore. He would take care of it. He ended his speech with a bright smile. The sister was pleasantly surprised by such words, and a smile appeared on her lips too. Her brother had grown up and was no longer a child. He was ready to take responsibility. She had always seen a little boy in front of her, but now her brother had grown up, and it was time for her to realize it. Chu was surprised by these words. A smudged human silhouette leaped out of the water, flying like a bullet towards the shore. It was a tall young man with broad shoulders and a sports figure that could be seen even through his clothes. It was unmistakably Chu. Indeed, he had lost weight, but his skin, which had been stretched out, didn't return to normal and hung in tatters. Chu's father was worried. His son had become too thin, with only skin and bones left. He looked as if he could break at the slightest fall. Chu planned to set off on a journey, claiming he would stay with the Namgun clan. Chu justified his trip as a desire to meet Sun, who was a part of their family through the Murim. In reality, Chu intended to begin his training. Despite his father's objections, Chu had already made up his mind, and promising to return unharmed, got up from the table and headed to gather his things. Sitting in his room, he sorted through the items he might need for the journey. He couldn't travel under his real name, so he decided to take on a name from the past, Jin. Gathering his belongings into one bundle and placing it on his back, he swung open the door, ready for new adventures and the path that awaited him. But as soon as he stepped outside, he was met by a crowd of people waiting for him. Huang approached him, introducing the delegation that would accompany him to his destination. Chu's father had certainly made an effort to ensure his son's safety. However, this was not part of Chu's plans. His plan was to obtain the virgin ginseng and kill the servant of chaos. But with such a crowd, it wouldn't work. No one should know about this. Otherwise, his father would create a fuss, and Chu wouldn't be able to explain his actions. He must not get caught. But then Chu came up with a plan. First, he needed to get rid of Huang. So, he suggested they have a drink together, claiming that Huang had always helped and protected him, and yet they had never had a drink together. Concealing his face with bandages, Chu smirked. Night fell over the Yu clan's estate, the perfect time for Chu's escape. Chu's sister walked under the night sky, accompanied by her servant, engaging in a leisurely conversation. She decided to visit Chu. The servant used to dress Chu in funny costumes and create elaborate hairstyles when he was still chubby. Suddenly, Chu's sister asked the servant who he reminded her of. The servant replied that he reminded her of her young mistress. After finishing the conversation and releasing the servant, the girl decided to continue on alone. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat, Chu quietly opened the door, intending to leave without disturbing anyone. Huang lay on the floor, heavily under the influence of alcohol and a strong sleep-inducing poison, unconscious. Suddenly he shouted, raising his hand and continuing to mumble in his sleep. He was just talking in his dreams. Chu's poison dispersed the internal energy, guaranteeing Huang's incapacitation until the next morning. Suddenly, Chu noticed his sister approaching him. She spoke first, asking if he wouldn't even say goodbye. She looked quite sad. Her sadness was palpable. After all, her beloved brother was leaving home. Chu was surprised to meet her here. Suddenly she hugged him, not trying to dissuade him from his plan, but asking him to return as soon as possible. She said that if it became too difficult, he could return anytime. She and their father would always wait for him. Chu was once again amazed. In the past, he had never had anyone who cared for him and worried so much. Preparing the horse and loading his belongings onto it, Chu was getting ready to leave. His sister had suggested he take this horse, a gift from the emperor himself. Jumping into the saddle and taking one last look at his home, which had become a cherished place in Chu's memory, he set off on his journey. He felt sorry to leave home, but no one besides him knew about the impending danger. Chu journeyed through the snow-covered forest all night, getting closer to his destination. As dawn broke, he arrived at the first location on his list. Patting the horse's neck and directing it towards the village, Chu pondered his next move. He first entered a tavern to have a hearty meal after the long journey. Food disappeared from Chu's plate at an incredible speed. Now that he had slimmed down, he didn't need to stick to a strict diet. Leaving a silver coin on the table after finishing his meal, Chu asked the tavern owner to gather all the ginseng gatherers and hunters who knew the area well. In a dimly lit room, a group of men gathered before Chu, standing in straight lines. One of them reported that they had discovered the location of virgin ginseng in the province of Hoi. Delighted, the leader of the unknowns ordered them to set out. Chu stood before the people brought by the tavern owner, the ones who knew the area well. One of them asked about the purpose of Chu's visit, suspicious of his appearance. Could he be a bandit? Understanding the misunderstanding, Chu quickly explained that he wasn't a bandit and that the bandages on his face were for medicinal purposes. He had arrived from a neighboring province. He also mentioned that his name was Jin, and he used to work for the Yu clan but was now looking for something in these parts as a former military advisor. Explaining that he was looking for a stone emitting a crimson light, the locals were a bit surprised by such a request and pondered it. One of the gathered men, despite the strangeness of the described stone, remembered something. When he was young, he got lost in the mountains and came across a strange stone. The description matched what Chu was looking for, and becoming more serious, he hurriedly asked where the stone could be found. The man hesitated for a moment but eventually spoke up, saying that it was at the peak of Pagoda. However, going there was not advisable. The place was the Fortress of 9 Dragons, in other words, the stronghold of mountain bandits who had settled there. This didn't scare Chu at all. Now it was clear why no one could find ginseng. Who would think of searching for it in a bandit's lair? Taking the hands of the man who knew the way, Chu politely began to implore him to guide him. It was crucial, and he had to get there at any cost. Seeing the sincere and honorable eyes of Chu, the man didn't hesitate for long and agreed to lead him there. The others were surprised by the positive response. The journey there was certainly not safe. Chu was glad that the man had agreed, and he genuinely thanked him without irony, knowing the danger of such a trip, both for himself and the guide. They walked for quite some time, navigating through snow-free mountain paths. Finally, they reached the desired location. Before them lay a chasm with a roaring river at the bottom, so deep that even the bottom couldn't be seen. Thanking the guide once again, Chu asked where precisely he had seen the stone. The man pointed in the direction where the stone should become visible at sunset. They waited until the sun approached the horizon, painting the surroundings in shades of red and orange. As the sun began to set, the whole area turned crimson, and the snow reflected the light even more. And when the sun was almost behind the mountain peak, Chu was able to see something. One of the stones in front of them started emitting a crimson glow. It was precisely what Chu had been searching for. Now, he was certain. Heartily thanking the guide, Chu decided to reward him with a gold pendant and send him back before they encountered mountain bandits. The man was grateful, surprised, and a bit embarrassed by the value of the payment. After saying goodbye, Chu approached the precipice. The next moment, he jumped down the cliff straight into the raging river. Gliding down, avoiding sharp protrusions, Chu approached the water's surface. Successfully entering the icy water, Chu resurfaced, looking around and searching for his next path. Since no one would have guessed that someone would swim across the river in winter, Chu headed toward the fortress. In the water, he had no equal. Quietly infiltrating the territory, Chu overheard bandits talking on a tower. They were discussing something about captives and selling them into slavery. Deciding to ignore it for now while he searched for ginseng, Chu focused his energy to locate the object of his quest, but instead, he found something else. A bandit emerged from the house, dragging a woman by her hair. His intentions were clearly anything but peaceful. Throwing the woman to the ground, the bandit began to kick her and sadistically torment her, reveling in his sadistic nature. Chu watched this scene with indecision. He couldn't just abandon everything and rush to help, but sitting here idly was also wrong. From the same house, a little girl appeared, crying loudly. The bandit noticed her immediately. The woman grabbed the man's leg, pleading him not to touch her daughter. How could he call himself human after such actions? But this wretch clearly didn't care. He raised his leg to stomp the woman's head into the ground. At this point, Chu couldn't bear it anymore. Every fiber of his being demanded punishment for this monster, who could no longer be called a human. Kicks rained down on the poor woman, who miraculously managed to stay alive. Chu was trembling with anger. He could no longer stand by and watch. He didn't care that he had stealthily sneaked in and didn't want to make a scene. Yet Chu still hesitated. He was disgusted with himself for not being noticed even as he was about to approach the bandit, who continued beating the woman. The little girl continued crying in grief and helplessness. She felt sorry for her mother. Unable to bear it any longer, Chu made a couple of quick moves and was already close to the bandit, who was about to meet Chu's fists. Infusing his entire body with spiritual energy, Chu prepared a powerful strike. Neither the mother nor the little girl, nor even the bandit noticed him as they were overwhelmed by the situation. But then, in one swift and fluid motion, the bandit fell to the ground with a broken face. Chu was a bit disappointed that he got stained with the blood of this scoundrel. After all, his clothes were quite expensive. The little girl was impressed by how Chu dealt with the bandit. She stopped crying, and admiration for her savior sparkled in her eyes. The girl asked if Chu had come here to save them, to which he replied somewhat irritably that he was just passing by. However, the girl's mother didn't share her daughter's optimism and expected anything from their new acquaintance, hiding her daughter behind herself. She asked in a trembling voice who he was, extending his hand, which must have seemed like a giant's hand sent only to cause pain. Chu covered them with his cloak, as it was cold outside, especially in the mountains. Realizing that Chu didn't pose a threat to them, the woman became more open to dialogue. Chu managed to learn from her where the other prisoners were. The woman pointed to a building nearby, where another bandit was guarding them. The guard noticed them, but Chu quickly knocked him out as well. Picking up their bodies, he dragged them inside the house to hide them. Once inside, Chu noticed that there were more people in the room. It was a crowd of prisoners, ranging from infants to the elderly, all of them visibly terrified. Informing them that he came to rescue them despite his appearance, Chu positioned himself at the back and promised to lead them out of there. The woman asked what they should do and where to go. At least one person was confident in Chu's plan. He informed her that she would lead the others. A bandit entered the building to find his lazy, as he thought, comrades in their cloaks and with axes. But the street was empty. When his gaze fell on two unconscious bodies of his fellow bandits, he looked threateningly at the crowd of prisoners and demanded to know what had happened and who did it. The people huddled in the corner, afraid to respond. The woman who was rescued first asked Chu what they should do. Chu instructed her to lead the others. While the bandit was inside the building, searching for his comrades, Chu evaluated the situation outside to plan his next move. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the two unconscious bodies of his accomplices. The bandit turned his threatening gaze towards the crowd of prisoners, asking what had happened and who did it. The people only cowered in the corner, remaining silent. Just then, a swift strike hit the bandit's neck, knocking him to the ground, completely bewildered. Standing over the defeated bandit, Chu checked the situation outside to assess and plan his next move. He noticed a watchtower on the edge of the cliff. A guard was supposed to be keeping an eye on the area from there. The guard, however, was not paying much attention to his surroundings. But at the last moment, he managed to see something. A blurry human silhouette, blurred by speed, was approaching the tower. It was almost at the base. Chu stopped beneath the tower, holding a torch in one hand and gathering energy for a strike with the other. Once he had gathered enough, Chu swung and struck the tower. A wave of spiritual energy spread in all directions, and the tower's foundation cracked like a spider's web. The tower went airborne as if hit by a siege weapon, and the guard on it couldn't react in time. A scream escaped the guard's mouth as he realized he was hurtling into the abyss, the bottom of which was invisible, filling his mind with terror. The former prisoners, almost free from their captors, came out to the street and noticed the absence of the tower, as if a hurricane had uprooted it. The destruction of the tower was the signal for the escape to begin. The first rescued woman led the others along the planned route towards the fortress exit. Meanwhile, Chu engaged in diversionary tactics, breaking doors and setting the interior of the fortress on fire with his torch, causing chaos. Chu hurled torches, setting one house after another on fire. The buildings ignited like matches. After all, wood burns well, and the fortress was made entirely of wood, from the walls to the living quarters. Standing amidst the burning houses, Chu decided to stir up more commotion to ensure the bandits didn't discover the escape. Meanwhile, the bandits were calmly sleeping in one of the barracks, dreaming without a care. Suddenly, one of them jolted awake, noticing the commotion on the street and catching the smell of smoke. Shouting that a fire had broken out, he began waking up the other bandits. They reluctantly woke up until the meaning of his words sunk in. The first bandit to wake up didn't manage to reach the door and escape outside. He was thrown back into the depths of the barracks. When the bandits turned their gaze towards the entrance, they saw a man with his face wrapped in bandages, holding a torch. It was Chu. Who else? The bandits asked who the hell he was. Chu calmly replied, asking them what they thought. Of course he was the arsonist. Having done his job, Chu started running. The entire fortress was now on high alert, and the bandits were hunting him, displeased with the abrupt awakening. Chu rounded a corner, hoping to shake them off. But one of the bandits quickly spotted him and pointed the direction to the others. Chu ran, and the bandits chased him. If only he had the ability to absorb and replenish energy, running wouldn't be necessary. Suddenly, as Chu turned another corner, a bandit with a spear lunged at him, intending to deal with the arsonist once and for all. Quick to react, Chu evaded the first attack and prepared for a counterstrike. Without slowing down, he elbowed the attacker, hitting him in the solar plexus and throwing him off the pursuit. Chu decided he had run enough. It was time to set a trap for the bandits. He focused his energy into his legs to increase his speed. Breaking the spear of the attacking bandit, he set it on fire, now wielding 2 torches. The bandit guards at the fortress entrance paid no attention to what was happening, as they couldn't see it from their perspective. Suddenly, a small stone flew towards one of the guards, possibly chipped off from somewhere. Turning their attention to the stone, the bandit guards noticed the blazing fortress in their field of view. Did someone attack them, or did the fire start for other reasons? Regardless, the bald and scruffy guards rushed towards the depths of the fortress to help their comrades. At the same time, as the entrance cleared, the prisoners, seizing the opportunity, also sprinted out of the fortress. They successfully overcame the exit and hurried away from the blazing mountain bandit camp, not even looking back. Inside the fortress, Chu was attacked from behind by a burly, bald, and dark-skinned man wielding nunchaku. The attacker delivered a powerful blow to Chu, but he managed to react and block it to some extent. Chu slid across the ground from the impact but managed to stay on his feet, using his hands to maintain balance. However, his baggage flew far away. The assailant was blind in one eye, covered by a bandage. The bald man, seething with anger, demanded to know who Chu was and how he ended up here. Chu decided to remain silent and not answer, but the bandits surrounded him, limiting his maneuvering space. The bald man asked if Chu was alone. Chu was initially cautious in his response, saying he was alone, but after some thought, he lifted his nose and declared that he alone was enough to take on the likes of them. The bald man was somewhat impressed, not entirely buying Chu's bluff. However, the noise caused by just one guy intrigued him. Chu was in a bad state. The attack by this guy had inflicted severe damage, considering their numbers and his condition. Things were really dire. Meanwhile, the bald man turned to his subordinates, realizing that the camp was still burning, and no one seemed to be in a hurry to put it out. After a motivating speech, the bandits rushed to extinguish the fire. The strongest ones remained with Chu when everyone else went to put out the fire. They were of no use here anyway. The bald man introduced himself as Sosan, the leader of the 9 Dragons Fortress. Chu had no intention of introducing himself in return. Not offended by Chu's refusal to introduce himself, the bald man continued. He said that he admired people like Chu and would like him to join them. After all, not everyone would have the courage to infiltrate a camp full of bandits. The bald man persisted with his persuasion, believing that Chu's inclusion would greatly strengthen his gang. Chu, deciding to buy some time, sat down on the ground, asking if they were really suggesting he become a mountain bandit. Pretending to be lost in thought while wiping his chin, Chu gathered spiritual energy. The bald man kept talking about how challenging it is to find suitable people nowadays, and how Chu's bravery should be rewarded. He suggested burying the incident with the fire and standing on equal footing with his close associates. Chu remained silent no matter what the bald man said. He simply continued to stall for time. The burly man couldn't tolerate being ignored any longer, and he erupted when Chu sarcastically replied that it sounded great. Rising to his feet, Chu questioned when a wolf should serve a cur. He was gradually recovering and trying to provoke the bandits. The bald man was consumed by rage, veins bulging on his face, and a ferocious snarl forming. Chu assumed a fighting stance and further provoked the gang leader by proposing a one-on-one battle, but the bald man didn't fall for the trick. Pointing at Chu, he ordered his subordinates to tear him to pieces. The hardened thugs lunged at Chu without any hesitation, relying on their numerical advantage. The scruffy bandit launched a swift attack on Chu, using his spear. However, Chu managed to evade and let the attack pass over him. Not a scratch remained on Chu's body, but his clothes were torn along with the bandages that covered his face. 3 bandits now surrounded Chu. One engaged him in hand-to-hand combat, with Chu dodging his straight punches. Another wielded the spear, and the third had nunchaku. When the bandits saw Chu's face without the bandages, they were slightly surprised, as he looked like an old man. The bandits began taunting Chu, making unpleasant comments about his appearance, but he didn't succumb to their provocations. Unlike them, Chu looked like a human being. The provocation worked, but not in the way the bandits intended. They only grew angrier. Chu leaped away from another nunchaku strike. Performing a complex pirouette in the air, Chu counterattacked the enemy with his legs. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to knock out the bandit. While Chu was airborne, one of the hand-to-hand fighters attacked him, shouting something about pathetic tricks. It was amusing to hear such words from a bandit. Nonetheless, Chu took a powerful blow to the torso, diverting his flight from the planned trajectory. Flying backward, Chu managed to twist in the air, executing a backflip and landing on his feet. No sooner had he touched the ground than the entire gang pounced on him, not giving him a moment to catch his breath. Attacks rained down on Chu one after another. He spun like a top, evading everything that came at him, but he couldn't keep this up for long. One of the punches connected with Chu's face, sending him airborne again and disrupting his concentration. Chu flew impressively, very impressively, but lacking wings, he eventually had to land. The bandits gathered around him like a pack of hyenas circling a wounded lion. Chu had underestimated them, and now he paid the price. How could he protect anyone when he was so weak? Chu let go of negative thoughts, reminding himself that he saved those people. At least they would be alive and safe. But he had no intention of dying in this place. While Chu tried to catch his breath, the one-eyed bandit spoke up. At first he thought Chu was brave, but as it turned out, it was foolishness. Pointing at Chu, he ordered him to be finished off. The dance with death resumed as Chu flowed like water, eluding the attacks of the assaulting bandits. X section, the 8 Drunken Immortals technique saved Chu, allowing him to avoid injuries. However, he was still far from his former form, having taken a couple of blows. Deciding to end it all with a single strike, Chu employed the technique of light steps and lunged at the gang leader, delivering a swift blow that only grazed him, scratching the enemy's throat. Unnoticed by the bandits, the battle shifted toward the edge of a cliff, and just as they were about to attack Chu again, he jumped into the abyss without hesitation. The last thing the bandits saw was Chu's hand, with all fingers clenched except for the middle one, a well-known gesture. The one-eyed bandit became furious at such an ending to the battle. He was completely unsatisfied, but he could do nothing about it now. Chu continued to fall into the darkness of the chasm, vowing to return for their heads once he became stronger, of course. The bandits looked down with mild bewilderment, while the one-eyed bandit ordered his subordinates to find the attacker's corpse. He wanted to skin him to vent his frustration. Before the leader could give further instructions, a bandit from the fort rushed over, reporting that inside the building with the prisoners, there were only 3 charred bodies. The bald leader was boiling like a kettle. So many problems because of one man. Skinning him wouldn't be enough, thought the bandit leader. Sosen gave orders to his subordinates to comb the entire area and find all the escaped prisoners, every last one of them. Meanwhile, Chu continued his descent, contorting in the air to face downwards, slowing himself in the air before finally entering the water with his feet. At first, Chu was afraid he would crash into the bottom. After all, his speed was considerable. But he suddenly came to a halt, not understanding why. Completely losing his speed, Chu hovered under the water's surface. Just as he was about to assess the situation and figure out why he stopped, he felt something pulling him. Within a second, the situation became clear. The water currents had formed a whirlpool, which began to pull him further and further into its